I thought maybe for today's video we dive into the Saturator of Bitwig Studio, because for me and maybe also a lot of people it's not really clear what it does exactly to the signal, and we're trying to find this out in this video. And yeah, I would say let's go. So this is how the Saturator looks like in Bitwig Studio, and at the title it says Saturator Destruction. And for me also all these devices are basically just distortion devices, and I mean devices like fuzz or overdrive, tape saturation, and saturation, of course. It's just creating harmonies or harmonics, not harmonies, harmonics above your root signal, and yeah, create this kind of distortion sound in a more or less the same way. And at the bottom here it says wave shaper. And the wave shaper is basically where you send a signal to a kind of a transfer function, which is represented here by this yellow line. And you can alter this line and can send the waveform or your signal onto a different path, which creates then or results in a different wave shape. And this is why it's called wave shaper. And I can show you this here in a minute with the oscilloscope here. You can also make this a bit bigger so you can see it pretty clearly on the screen. Yeah, nice. And we have here a DC offset device on the left side. And DC offset device basically just creates positive and negative values. And if you modulate this here at audio rate, it basically creates a sound. And this is also representing what your speaker cone or your membrane at your speakers are doing. So when you have the slider here at positive range, you basically move your speaker cone or membrane out. And when you're on the negative range, you're moving it back in. And if you do this pretty fast at audio rates, then you create a signal. And for this experiment, you basically just used an LFO with super slow speed, so we can analyze what's happening with the signal. And you can also see here that we have here a transfer function on the saturator, and it's basically doing nothing. We have here just a rounded edge at the top. But it's not affecting the signal at all because it's not loud enough to reach this this curve here. So when we bring up here the signal maybe more, you can see then the signal is becoming a bit flat at the top. You can barely notice it. It's not that visible. Maybe I make this a bit slower here. Oh, a bit. So we can analyze it better. You can also see it here in the bottom. So we basically change now here the yellow line. Bring this down. So what this does is a threshold. So we apply this curve here basically early on. So the signal doesn't need to be that loud to be on is affected by that. And you can see here now our clean sine wave becomes like a rounded squarey waveform. This is exactly what this line here represents. When we go to a certain loudness or to a certain value point here, we bring the waveform to a rounded edge or to a rounded path here, and then we go to a straight line. And you can see it's a straight line and the edges are rounded. So that's exactly what we dialed in. And you can see also that this is applied to the negative range. So we have here a 0 line in the middle. And this is applied to the positive range and to the negative range of the signal itself. So when we look here at the saturator, you can see we have a display at the left side here where we have an orange line and a yellow line. And the yellow line is the positive range and the orange line is the negative range. But in this display, we only have a yellow line. And the reason for that is that this line here is basically the negative and the positive range at the same time, displayed on the same display on the same line. So as you can see, we go now back in the negative range and it goes back up here. And when we go, or now it's to the negative range, then it goes also back up. So it's basically positive, negative, positive, negative. And yeah, it's pretty much hard to get in the brain how it works. But if you look here at the graph at the left side, you can see It's much easier to get. But then again, we can change how the wave shaper or the saturator behaves in the negative range differently from how it behaves in the positive range. And we have these knobs here at the right side, and it says loud threshold skew, which basically changes how the signal behaves in the negative range. As you can see, we have now here our orange line. So we can say we want to have this transfer function happening earlier on in the negative range than in the positive range. And you can see it is also displayed here in the oscilloscope. Maybe we have to wait until it moves beyond my cam here. But you can see here the positive range is the same as before, but in the negative range we break earlier onto a straight line than in the positive range. So you can alter how the saturator behaves in the negative range than in the positive range. We can also change here the knee, which makes the breakdown even harder. And you can see it changes the positive and the negative range at the same time. So these knobs are basically only knobs to dial in the difference, what you want to have different in the negative range than in the positive range. They are not kind of absolute values you can dial in. It's relative to what you dialed in on these big knobs here. Then we have here also this one here, where we can kind of go back to negative, and this is called, I think, maybe write it in the comments if I'm wrong here, but this is called folding, because maybe go back here to this, because you can see it already here on the graph. You take the signal above this line, or above this point, maybe I freeze this down here, above this point here, and instead of letting the signal pass and go into a nice arc here back to this point, you fold it back onto itself. It's like a piece of paper. It's like a piece of paper, like this one here, and then you take the edge and fold it back onto itself like this. This is why it's called folding, more or less. Instead of having this waveform, this edgy thing here peeking out, you bring it back down to this. And this is also why it's called wave folding. Okay, so we have this, and we can also change, of course, how it behaves. Maybe in the negative range. So we have folding at the positive range, and we have no folding at the negative range. Maybe remove the freeze here. So now we should see this folding only happening down here, and at the top it should be pretty fine. Oh, it's exactly opposite now. Okay. Maybe put it this way. Oh yeah, now we have the folding at the orange part here, which is down here. And at the top we have still the rounded sine wave letting completely pass without alteration. Okay, that's basically the simple explanation for this graph here. There's also these three knobs here, which is called quiet. And this is called quiet because it only applies to this bottom area here. And the bottom area are basically all the values below a certain point. And if we look at here at this graph here at the top, we basically just apply changes to this area here around the 0 line, so the quiet parts. And if you do stuff like this here, you think maybe something like this, it's almost like you create a noise gate, where you filter out everything, or instead of letting here the signals die out slowly and letting it die out into the quietness, you bring it straight down to 0, which then results in a gate effect, or you remove the signal completely in an instant. So maybe we use some real sounds and try out how this works in the real life. For instance, I could use here an polysynth, and the polysynth has some noise, and it can show you how this works with the gate I just explained here. Maybe get rid of here some just these parts. Okay, so we have noise dialed in. You can hear. Can remove the noise completely. Just using all these, everything that's below this point is basically completely muted. And this is nice when you have maybe some drums. Maybe let's see if I can find here some real drums. Oh yeah, this is nice. So switches to an audio track, okay. Can you hear it? Yeah, I can completely remove some of the tails of the drums. But it also introduces some kind of noise at the edge here, probably. And sometimes this is also nice on bass sounds, where you have a big fat bass sound and you have reverb on it, and you want to cut out the reverb, but also want to have distortion, so you can basically do it in one step. And maybe I can show you this here in a minute. So maybe we use a phase 4, make some bass. And okay, and then you put reverb on it, and then you use the saturation device, and then you see a hard cut. And then you can remove some of these reverb sounds. And the difference here is when you remove this, it's slowly dying out, and here you can cut it off. So it's a kind of a gate effect and a distortion or overdrive effect at the same time. So this is pretty handy sometimes. And of course is when you use drums, like we did here, use the real drums. And instead of gating, we can also apply here a nice rounded edge at the top. You can see when I use here the drive, I basically raise the input volume of the signal going into the saturator. And it changes here also the curve because the scaling of the curve is then a bit different. Because if you make it louder, then of course this curve here is in a different scale to the input signal. And you can also see here that when you have this linked on, the saturator tries to compensate for your input gain on the output. So when you basically raise the input, you lower the output. Okay, so speaking about harmonics, I have your test tone, which creates a clean sine wave. So there are no harmonics, it's just one frequency. And when we bring in here the saturator, you can see here the white line is at this position here. When we change the gain of the test tone, we can change the white line. We can also use here the drive to raise the input signal. Maybe bring this bit down here, make a harmony. And then we kind of create harmonics from this single sine shape here. You can also see here the odd and the even harmonics changing differently. We have also here this low pass filter, which is only applied to the saturated signal. We can tame the overtones or the harmonics a bit here, bring them down. And there's also that you can change the filter type. And I would advise you to click to select a device, hit F1, then look at the modes here, and you can see steepness, pole count of the low pass filter. G modes are gentler and R modes are a bit bumpier. You can try out different settings here for the low pass filter and play around a bit and, you know, find the sweet spot for your current sound. But in general, you create overtones and you have to be aware of it. And sometimes when you have a super clean sound like a bass drum and it sounds alone and not that fat, then you use a saturator, it creates overtones, and then you have this much richer sound in the end. Maybe I can use your kick drum, show you this maybe. Kick, E-kick. Okay, so let's remove this. Let's loop this. So nothing happens to the kick sound. It's like a sine wave hitting just one frequency, more or less. And when you add harmonics with the saturator, it sounds more fat and present. Maybe fuzz. So you can completely change the tonality of your kick drum, make it more fat. And if you think about listening to kick drums on small speakers or small earbuds or headphones, you need these overtones to make the listener aware that there is actually a kick drum somewhere in your mixdown. And also on bigger speakers, it's much better to have some of the harmonics to make the brain notice that there is something below there. So that's basically my version of how the saturator works, or how I think it works. And you can still see I'm mostly a musician, not a technician. I'm also not a developer, so I try to explain it in simple words. If you have some questions about it, or maybe some corrections, then please leave it in the comments. Also leave a like if you like the video, and if you want to stay up to date, then please subscribe to the channel. And if you have some hints maybe at what I can do next video wise, or maybe tutorials for, then also leave me some comments. It's always helpful. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.